Hello, and welcome to the You Show Show. It is the show where you show things. I am Kelvin Lays McMurray, and today I am joined with my very, very good friend, Chris Livengood. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Calvin.
How are you, buddy?
I'm doing all right, man.
Welcome to the studio. It's good to have you here,
It's good to be here.
and thanks for taking the time to hop on. And today we are going to talk about some video games.
Oh, God, yes.
Some very good video games at that. But Chris, you are one of our many amazing, awesome, good friends out of the Winston-Salem, North Carolina region. I know you through my girlfriend, who has become very good friends with your sister-in-law Zeke, who has actually also
Yes.
been on this show. Her and I talked about Schitt's Creek and F is for Family. Have you seen
Oh,
either of
my
those?
God, yes. That makes sense.
Yeah, kind of like similar shows, but very different shows. They're technically both family shows, but in very
Yes.
different lights. But anyway, yeah, you are one of our very good friends. You're a very good friend to me, and you're one of the people we go every year to the Outer Banks in North Carolina. Which, if you've never been to the Outer Banks, anyone listening at home, go to the Outer Banks in North Carolina. You won't regret it. It's amazing. It's
Super, super delectable for the brain.
Yes, it's an amazing, relaxing spot. You also run and own and operate your own shop, Ember Audio. I got the digital tour recently. It looks pretty cool. I unfortunately have not gotten to see it in person, and that's in Winston Salem. And obviously, you can explain it better than me. But it's like it's a high end.
So basically, what we are is, if you know what a hi-fi shop is, it's a stereo shop where you can go and listen to different kinds of gear, and understanding that all these engineers are doing the best they can to try to get you, the truest sound possible as they sort of measure it. And the reality is, million monkeys, million typewriters. Everybody's coming up with a different version of, Ulysses. So when you put them together, they all sort of alter the way you perceive your music. And our job is to help you kind of parse that alchemy through demonstration and education. And we're very sort of heavy on both of those things. But we're actually Ember Audio and Design because we're also a modern design showroom. So we also factor in interior design and interior applications for sound and acoustic treatments. They kind of handle the whole picture because you do have to have something to set a turntable on, and it's nice to have a comfy chair. And we just kind of made that connection over years of doing it.
And I know you're based out of you're based out of Winston Salem, but I think like anyone listening at home, if you ever have any audio questions in terms of like audio gear as to what to maybe purchase, I would highly recommend checking out Ember Audio. Like I know you have an Instagram account, that's where I follow you.
Yeah.
Chris is the person that I 1,000,000% promise you that if you reached out to him in a polite fashion that was all questions pertaining to audio, he would 100% answer and take his time to help out. So
Definitely try to just give free advice, even if it's a local client who obviously would probably want to shop with us. We try to kind of do that whole job without some expectation, because I think the reality is if you educate people and you empower them to kind of shop for themselves, and you happen to have really good taste in picking gear, then enough of them will do business with you so that you can afford a house and a sandwich, which is my whole goal.
I remember I once sent you a link to a turntable that I was interested in buying, and you didn't even review it. You didn't even tell me about it. I think you just texted me back a different link, and you were like, "Buy this one," and I was like, "Okay," and I bought it, and I have it.
I
It's in
think
my
it
living
was.
room. It's
I think it wasn't a Crosley or something, but it was something with like a USB output interface, and it's like just the second you see that, unless you're actively interested in digitizing vinyl, just don't do that. Buy a Riga P1 or a Project Debut or something else.
That's perfect. I love it. Yeah, it's still in my house today. We still use it, which is dope. So.
Brad.
But anyway, so for today, you are the first person. I'm really excited today to chat because you are the first person to be on the show so far that has picked a video game. Everybody else has been movies, music, and TV show, which is great. That I love talking about those as well. But nobody has talked about video games yet. So we're gonna talk about some. We're gonna nerd the fuck out on some video games.
I picked this because I don't think there's an intellectual property or a story that's ever so affected me. So
Yeah, especially the second game. We're gonna get into all this, I promise. But the second game has something that I've never seen in a video game, and I may have never seen in a movie slash television show. But we'll get into that in a bit. So the game, technically it's the games two. You'd asked me to play both of them, which is very important, and I'm glad that you were like, yeah, dude, stick with it and get through it. But anyway, the games that we're going to talk about today is The Last of Us Part 1 and The Last of Us Part 2. And I think before we hop into that and why you picked it and to talk about why it's important, why it's special, I think let's talk for like a few minutes to kind of talk about video games and like the video game industry and the state of the video game industry, because I think that'll help
Sure.
some people understand um, the reason that both of these games, especially in my opinion, the second one, is insanely important.
Yeah.
Um, video games are awesome. They have been for a long time. The industry is kind of nuts. I'm pretty certain that it makes more money than like the film industry does now. I'm pretty certain that they crossed that line a few years ago, and the industry as a whole is like, it's ginormous, and there are so many types of games alive today, and the technology is like still progressing. They are working on like technology to make it look better, sound better, feel better. They're making games more accessible to like a variety of types of people with say like blindness and deafness and many other things going on that they can help out with and help everyone gaming. And the funny thing out of all of it though is that like out of all this amazing technology that we're being thrown, so many games are just like medium warm.
Yeah. There's a lot of, it's actually the stat that I heard is that it's actually larger than the film and sports industry combined. So it's about $180 billion. And that's, a staggering number, but it's actually expected to just continue increasing by about 20% over the next 5 years. So it's really the most consumed media format out there. But as you're saying, I mean, there's just an enormous amount of middle floating, like lukewarm quality control, whether it's the actual gameplay or there's a lot of trends ultimately. And it's sort of like when you look at like music, like grunge music, there are like 10 bands, from that sort of era of music that are really world changing. And then there's a lot of bands that sounded sort of like them that some record exec was like, I bet you we can make $1 million. Let's sign these guys. And they were great on their own, I'm sure. But when you just stack them up against Screaming Trees or Pearl Jam or whatever, there you go.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because like you were saying, like there's a lot of trends. There's a lot of games that they saw the formula in other games and it was like, well, that one works, so let's do it too. Like an example that pops into mind is like the Assassin's Creed series. The first one came out and it blew people away. It blew me away. And this is a game where you can have a character, and I think it was like Ancient Jerusalem. Is you're running around Ancient Jerusalem and you're climbing up buildings and like stabbing people with like hidden daggers up your sleeve in an awesome fashion. And then they made one a year until the end of time, and it never stopped. And I was like, this is ridiculous. It's the same game literally being sold to you over and over and over again with a different hat on.
With minor improvements. You see this with sports games as well, but like I'm in the process of playing through Horizon Zero Dawn, which is, for all intents and purposes, just a Me Too clone of that. But there are examples where like Horizon Zero Dawn is actually a better game than the Assassin's Creed games, but it's exactly the same format. It's an open world. You can go anywhere, do anything, action platformer with some light RPG elements,
And it's just kind of funny that it's like, video games are expensive to make. And so when there is like a risk factor, that I can understand where publishers are like, no, we ain't risking it. You know what I mean? Like, no,
for sure.
we're not risking it. We're not going to do that. We're going to stick our necks out because we've invested $68 million into this game. You're not risking it, and, which is another reason why the games that we're going to talk about today are interesting, because they did risk it.
They take future risks, yeah.
And so it's kind of funny too, like with video games, I think there's still a lot of people that think, video games are just Frogger and like Super Mario Brothers. And they're still obviously making games like that today. We call that kind of like either platformers or like an arcade style of game. But there are some games that have truly, honestly push the envelope in terms of creativity, especially in storytelling, to give you something memorable. Like, help me out here, but like a huge memorable thing that just instantly pops into my head is Final Fantasy VII. Up to that point, if you beat the game, everyone in your party, because you can collect multiple characters to play as you go in throughout the game, everyone in your party is alive. And Final Fantasy VII, they give you this really cool character named Aerith, and I remember the first time I played that game, she was my main healer, and about halfway, maybe three-quarters of the way through the game,
After you've invested 30 hours into the game.
yeah, she gets stabbed and she dies, and everyone and myself was like, "What? Like, no, she can't die." You know what I mean? Like, no, you can't do that. But they did, and it stands out, and that's why, like, still to this day, it's everyone's favorite. Even though, in my opinion, Final Fantasy X is the best, but that's just my opinion. And so, games like movies have like invested a ton of money and time and effort to push that envelope. And I think that overall they have done a really good job. And there have been many games throughout the years, because like the gaming industry, in comparison to like the film, television, radio industry, is insanely short-lived. Like, it's still technically an infant, but it's like advanced beyond all three of them combined.
It's probably 42 years old, but it's on a curve. So, as you're making this sort of comparison for people who maybe aren't necessarily video game players, we can look at the film industry, from the silence to the talkies era. There was a pretty long period of time where there really wasn't a lot of motility, and maybe there was a lot of innovation in action scenes and in cinematography. Everything was new, and so there's innovations all the time, and no one to tell anyone what was normal. But about 20 years into the film industry, you start to see, talkies, you start to see longer, standardized formats, you start to see theaters become standardized. Then came the voice of the theater speakers, so audio became standardized and the soundtrack was looped in with the film. And then it just didn't really change a lot. Decade by decade, there would be some advancements, and certainly there are some amazing, groundbreaking films, but we're talking about 120 years of history or something. Video games have been around for 42 years. And when I started playing, I'm almost 40 now, and I started playing at a very young age, 4 or 5 years old. And video games were kind of stabilized in that sort of 8-bit world for a very long time. And nothing really changed. And you didn't get stories until I think 98, 99, outside of like some text-based RPGs and role-playing games and things. There was not a lot of verisimilitude. There was not a lot of innovation. And then with the advent of 3D and borderline realistic graphics, all of a sudden people started to have tools they could work with to tell deeper stories. And you bring up Final Fantasy VII. I think that's a perfect example of this 100-plus hour game where you're really spending a great deal more time with these characters than you do with a lot of multi-season TV shows, developing these connections. And I think people saw an opportunity to tell dramatic arcs and to have character growth and multi-layer stories. The Final Fantasy franchise you bring up, each character has their own, thing going on. They have their own reasons for being there and their own personalities and
Conflicts and backstories, and like, yeah, and it's the whole storytelling package, but like you said, in 100 hours, which is bananas. That's that's 10 seasons of Game of Thrones. Like,
it is. And 10 good seasons, not like the first three that were decent and then whatever else they did. And so what I would posit to people who haven't played video games is that the last 42-ish years of video games, the last 5 to 10 have been just alarmingly massive in terms of the way they've developed. And part of it is not just that the technology is catching up and giving people tools to work with. If the technology is granular enough, we can do anything, right? But you would have to have an army of people to literally do something that is perfect and realistic. So what's really changed is that the people who are designing these games, who are my age and your age, Calvin, are also film buffs and fathers and sons and daughters and having life experiences and being affected by the whole world and all of the, sort of catharsis that comes with just being a body in the modern world. And their tastes are developing where they want something deeper than a shallow platform game or Super Mario Brothers. They're looking for something that really goes beyond film, goes beyond television, is interactive, and really pulls you in to telling a deeper story. And sort of the reason that, I picked this is because I think this is the first beat in time where you can point it and say, this is where we go past what film can do, past what and other forms of media can do to tell a story that, at least in my experience, impacted me in an enormous way emotionally, in a way I was really prepared for. I'm a pretty self-possessed, mentally healthy person, and this straight up wrecked my frame for like a month.
There's obviously, if people are into games, you've got your PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo. I mean, that's the main four. It's been the main four for a long time. So this is exclusively only on PlayStation. If anyone's interested, if anyone doesn't know it, I'm sure gamers are probably like rolling their eyes at this point. Like, dude, we know all this. Fucking get to the point. But but yeah, I think that kind of summarizes everything in terms of like, again, what I'm just trying to do is just create like why this game is important, because out of the world of like games where nothing like these games are going to stand out is what I'm trying to say. And so I guess with further ado, let's talk about some Last of Us.
Okay.
Let's just start strictly on the focus of the first game, just to kind of get through that. But I think you and I are probably most antsy to talk about the second, if I had to guess.
For me, I spent so much time. Yeah, I think my experience was different for yours. You played them back to back as like a sort of a holistic, and they really are meant to be. It is a part one and a part two. It is a single story cycle, and there may very well be a part three at this rate. But I played The Last of Us when it came out. I saw what the general thrust of the game was: post-apocalyptic, quasi-zombie survival horror, right up my alley. Super gritty, super dark, incredible motion capture from a company that is known for getting hand movements and eye ticks right. I mean, really granular levels of human detail. And they were clearly trying to tell a darker, much more mature story, and I'm very attracted to that. So I picked it up, and this was, I don't know, what, 7, 8, 9 years ago when it came out on PlayStation 3. So I had time to love this game, this first part, never knowing if there was going to be a part two, for 6 or 7 years. And I think I must have played through it 12, 13, 14 times. And when people would ask, what is my favorite game? It was easy, instant answer every time. So it sat with me really strongly, precisely because of, yes, the whole thing, but because of its ending. And then when I heard part two was coming out, I had a visceral physical reaction upon the game's announcement, and I think I watched the internet on a daily basis for any new details for 16 or 17 months, just waiting for it to come out. And ultimately, when it came out, it surpassed the original experience in kind of every way. Absolute respect to the original experience. And so that my experience is very different from yours ultimately. So the first game for me was an example of a company that was already kind of at the height of their powers, having released some very successful story-driven franchises that had fun action, elements to them. And they're known for a sort of Indiana Jones style series of games called Uncharted that are, liquid smooth to play and have a really good sense of weight and impact and are very funny with compelling, relatable, hilarious characters who you sometimes have some feelings about. But this was a different gear for them entirely. As while, yes, the action is, depending on who you ask, really compelling and fun to play, it just was so not the most important thing that it was a slickly produced game that had good sense of weight and timing and felt good and had wonderful sort of era-breaking graphics. It was that it was a heartbreaking story that was told with so much respect to what grief and loss and love and connection really means. And having immersed myself in, dark, violent cinema for a really long time, that is so often lost. And there have been some films in the last 20 years that have really gotten it right. But they are few and far between. And to see a game do this to the extent that they did it just impressed itself upon me. It walked with me everywhere I went for a few years.
Yeah, it'll get its hooks in you, and it'll stay with you. It's a game that as you're playing it, like it's hard because life always finds a way to get in the way. But like as I was even playing the first one, it was always just like you got to a new point and it was like, God damn it, I have to see what's around the corner. Like I have to keep going.
I apologize to my bosses during that era of my life, especially that first year of the because I was staying up till 4 or 5 in the morning and just fucking like zombified, walking my way through getting a paycheck. So sorry, various bosses. I think probably giving some context of what the story's about, because that's really the primary thing. The world assumes that there's an actual real sort of not virus, but fungus called the cordyceps. Fungus. Is it a fungus? I think it's a fungus.
I've always felt like it was very fungal in nature. Yes.
Yeah. And so the cordyceps fungus exists in the animal kingdom, but is never sort of passed on to the bipedal warm mammalian scale of things. It generally affects ants, beetles, small lizards, things that are smaller. And cordyceps is basically a spore that once it is inhaled by whatever that cordyceps targeted creature base is, makes its way to the brainstem and causes them to go back to the nest wherever, say, the anthill is, and then their heads explode and it spreads more spores to more of them, and that's its life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So the game assumes that at some point, whether it is the response, they never answer this question, but whether it's responsible of an engineered virus for weapons uses or whether it just naturally evolves, it finally bypasses that bipedal warm mammalian scale, and in a few short weeks wipes out 60% of the world's population, leaving the world crawling with these horribly misshapen, what used to be people, fungal carriers that are animate, that are whose driving instinct is to pass this virus on through bites, or in some cases, depending on the level of mutation, through actually exploding and blowing spores everywhere. So a very dangerous world where the U.S. government response, and we assume the world's government response, was to go into martial law, create enclaves that are heavily defended, and life is, very quickly becomes just survival of the fittest, and incredibly brutal. But where the game opens is on the eve of this, in just outside of Austin, in a suburb, and you have a single father who's probably in his early 30s and his teenage daughter who's probably 12 or 13, Joel and Sarah Miller. And Joel is coming home from a contracting job. He's clearly a building contractor of some kind, works with his brother Tommy, and has finished a long, obviously stressful day at work. It's actually call. And it's the most relatable thing ever as a business owner to just be like, it's 11 o'clock at night and these motherfuckers can't stop calling me. And he sits down on the couch, and him and his daughter share a moment. It's obviously his birthday, and he's working even then. And she's managed to get his watch fixed. And, later on that evening, Sarah goes to bed, and you wake up as Sarah, and you sort of, for whatever reason, have just received a phone call on the house line, which I think is the biggest sort of I guess, what's the word for it? The biggest conceit of the game is that people still have landlines in 2030. They didn't. No one did.
No, they didn't. No, yeah, no, they didn't.
That's fine. So her landline goes off, and that wakes her up, and she goes to find her dad, and he's not anywhere to be seen. And just then there's an explosion within earshot and eyeshot if you're eagle-eyed enough to look out the window when it happens. And on the news, there's some bad things happening. She goes downstairs frightened, sees her dad's cell phone. There's messages from Tommy. Obviously something's wrong. And then her dad comes crashing through, opens the door from the backyard, and starts looking for a handgun. And all hell breaks loose. And what has happened is basically a huge viral outbreak of this cordyceps virus, fungal virus. And they are kind of forced to get it together and get the hell out. And Tommy joins them in this, and they sort of try to make their escape through the city of Austin. And yeah, so the game presents you with this very dawning horror that the world is coming to an end.
And you're right there on, yeah, you're right there on the front line as it's happening. And like you said too, like one of my favorite things with like the start of this game is just how it just starts, because that's life. It's just like, well, here we go, it's starting. And yeah, they never go back to it. They never go back and explain like, oh, it was Dr. Fauststein in the evil secret lab in France who had this.
It's important, because what is important is the frailty and the strength of human beings, and that connection is really a conceit of trust that, once broken, is very hard to rebuild again, much like civilization. And I think the sort of heart narrative in all of this is that duality of strength and frailty in the human spirit, and human beings as a group versus individuals. And what you see in those opening moments is that people are monstrous when they're terrified, that people are just as dangerous as this virus. And without spoiling the game for anybody, this comes at an enormously high cost within the first 15 minutes of the game. We want to treat spoilers. How hard do you want to go in? I don't think we
I don't
avoid.
think we can't not do it. So yeah, I would say this is like the kind of the end of the road for spoiler content if you have not played these games yet. And would
Take our word for it. It's probably one of the most compelling stories ever told. That said, spoilers, now. So I think one of the things that we're going to talk about a lot is Joel and what Joel means in the first game, and why it's so difficult for people to digest in the second game. So we have to start by, why is Joel special? Joel is this hardworking single father. Obviously, had a kid when he was in his very late teens or early 20s. The relationship, his wife is almost not mentioned. It's found in some notes, I think, later on in the game. But his wife really isn't talked about, or the mother of his daughter. But he very clearly is doing everything in his life to try to make sure that his daughter has this great life. This is a story that has obviously been told so many times, but we obviously also know people that love their kids with such enormity and profundity that they make their whole world about them, while still making space to support them. And he is in all things research you can find within the game, what little they give you, has genuinely been a wonderful father and is gifted with an incredibly lovely daughter who loves him very much. And see her gunned down within the first 15 minutes to 20 minutes of the game, and you have to watch him hold his dying daughter in his arms as he loses everything, and then the credits roll. The Last of Us.
It's okay, baby. We're safe. We're safe. Hey, we need help. Stop! Please. It's my daughter. I think her leg is broken.
Stop right there!
Okay. We're not sick.
Got a couple of civilians on the outer perimeter. Please advise.
Daddy, what about Uncle Tommy?
We're gonna get you to safety and go back for him, okay?
Sir, there's a little girl. But... Yes, sir.
Somebody, we've just been through hell. Okay, we just need... Shit.
Yeah, and that scene is very important too, because it's like you were talking about. It's so effectively you and your brother Tommy and his daughter Sarah, you all get in a car, and yeah, there's these really cool lines that I noticed playing it, where again it's like, where is this human terror ending and where are the zombies beginning? And there's a lot of blurred lines right there where it's like, oh no, these aren't zombies, these are just really scared people running for their lives, but they're still acting in a terrifying manner. Followed then by, again, yeah, this idea of extreme militarism in the sense of an emergency and the powers and the capabilities and that they have. So Joel is carrying his daughter Sarah. Some shit fucks up and he's carrying her.
Yeah, the car's been crashed, and in the process, she has injured her leg, and he's had to carry her through a panicking wake of people.
Yes, and so after all this hell, everything, it's like, oh, here's a soldier, and obviously, like, the soldier's gonna help out. They don't know, if her injury is from a zombie, if she's gotten bit, or they don't even know the situation. So the soldier's basically ordered to execute both of them. Joel does not want this. Turns around, hightails it. A gunshot goes off. They fall down like a hole or a pit of some sort, and we then discover that Sarah has been shot and Sarah dies. This is the first 20 minutes of the game.
Yeah, and I want to take a second just to dive in, because I know we could go about this for 12 hours, but one of the things that really broke my heart about the scene is the soldier's obviously a fairly young man. He's part of the National Guard. They're locking down the highway, and he's down on the side of an escarpment coming down away from the highway that Joel is trying to get to, because that's clearly a safer place to be than what's behind him. And this soldier orders them to halt, puts them at gunpoint. He's shining a light on them, and he radios back to command because he's not sure what he should do. And you can hear in his voice, when he gets the command to gun them down, how reluctant. He actually, I believe, asked them, "Are you sure?" or something to that effect. He's very unsure about doing this. And then he goes and he does it anyways. And he unloads 5 or 6 rounds into Joel and Sarah as Joel is turning away to shield his daughter, which is his first reaction. And then Tommy stops this entire scene by blowing the kid's brains out, so he can't do any more damage, but the damage is sort of already done. And you watch Sarah realize she's shot. You hear how much pain she's in. You see Joel lose his mind and try to salvage the situation. The camera pans up to his pained face, and then you hear her stop struggling, and it pans back down to his dead daughter as he is begging for her to come back, or for this just not to be happening at the moment. And the game sits you in that moment and then rolls a bunch of audio while it gives you the initial opening sort of credits. And in the background, you hear all of these news reports coming through that seem to take place over the course of some undisclosed period of time. That period of time is 20 years.
Yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, because then it just cuts to black and it's like 20 years later, and it's like, wait, what? Like,
yeah,
what? Yeah, that was very cool.
So now you're stuck with waking up as Joel, 50-something years old, broken watch that your daughter had fixed for your birthday 20 years ago on the night she died still on your arm, and you look like hammered shit.
Yep. Yeah. You don't look in good shape.
Yeah. It's been a bad 20 years.
From there, then it's the thing that's very cool, and the one thing that I really enjoy about the game is that it's very easily and very quickly established the sense of tribalism that's happening in the world, and that is something that is going to be a theme in the first and the second game.
Yeah.
You are part of this community. It's, again, under very, very strict security because zombies are in the world. But the most interesting thing out of all of that, of making it 20 years later, is like, that's just the world now.
It's an environmental effect like rainstorms or earthquakes.
Yep, and it's just what you live with now. And the one thing we're going to talk about in just a minute, there's a character named Ellie, and I think when you first meet her, she's got to be like, I don't know, 12 maybe.
I think she's 12 going on 13. Yeah.
So her whole life has been this post-apocalyptic world, and that I as soon as that dawned on me, I can't remember what moment, because you just didn't think about it the first time you met her.
Yeah. Yep. All she's ever known is the extant world as it stands. Yeah.
And that's really cool because now she's learning about from the people around her what the world was, because she has no concept of it, and that is really cool. And that's something that the game nailed really well, is this idea of what would it be like to grow up in this world. And that's something that a lot of like The Walking Dead comes to mind, but they're still in the like almost immediate aftermath of the event itself. Like, I think the show only like a year or two has passed, so
there's not a huge scope there. And the world you're playing in The Last of Us is set in 2033, and the world stopped in 2013. So you can find PlayStation 3 consoles, just dusty PlayStation 3 consoles laying around surrounded by various Naughty Dog games. Plasma televisions are still fairly thick. There are magazines and movie posters and advertisements, and all of it is paused from the day the world ended because nothing else happened after that.
And then it's cool too. Immediately, so basically, yeah. So Joel's in this area. Where is he living at the start of the game? I can't even remember. Is it
Boston? He's in Boston.
Okay.
And he's been basically living inside of a controlled government zone and then sneaking out to acquire things. He's basically been a scavenger off and on, and that's not all he's been doing. Tommy and him, there's a whole backstory there where they did whatever they had to do, and that meant killing a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's
professional murderers. They have been guards. They have been everything but cannibals.
Yeah. Yep. But they've done some shit. And you get that feeling right away that they have done some things that has made him the tough, grizzled person that he is today. So you set out, I can't remember her name, you set out with like a friend, you go on some adventures to go round up some supplies, and then you have to meet a person.
Yeah, so you're going out with Tess. So Joel has sort of a partner who is also a trader, scavenger, underground black market broker named Tess. And Tess is, as the game sort of opens into its first real chapter, has just returned from getting jumped and almost murdered. And she was able to fend off and we assume kill the people who jumped her, to associates of one of their sort of fellow trading partners. And Joel is waking up apparently hungover, and they have a little conversation to decide that that's not going to stand. They're going to have to take some revenge, and that is sort of your opening moment, is having to go after this guy whose name escapes me at the moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of names in both of these games, and yeah, I can't keep them all straight either. But
his name was Robert.
Okay, Joel, Tommy, and Ellie and Abby. Once we start talking about the fourth one, are probably going to be the main four. So just Joel and Ellie for right now are like the main.
Let's keep it to that. Yeah.
Characters. So yeah, you go out on this mission. It kind of introduces the gameplay and the mechanics to you as the player as you go out. And the one thing that I did like immediately from the opening of the game and obviously into the rest of it is it is very good, like you said, at letting you pick how you want to play. I am a mouse and keyboard kid. If I have to play a game that involves like shooting with guns, I'm going to do 100% better on a mouse and keyboard than I am on a controller with thumbsticks. Yeah. I am terrible with the thumbsticks. So I was pretty shit at the combat in both of these games. So I relied heavily on stealth. That was my favorite thing in the game. If you ever give me a game and it has stealth mechanics, I'm gonna use them because it's my favorite thing in games till the end of time. Like I'm a person where like I will sit in a corner for 5 minutes just sitting there waiting for the perfect opportunity to like figure out what's going on to then go in. Like I'm that person where I don't care if I get to sneak around shit, I will do it.
And I as a person who's kind of cross-trained in both most of my adult life, I mean, I started on consoles. I've been a PC gamer for a very long time. I'm pretty comfortable with both, but one of the things that is a conceit of this game, which I think is very realistic, is yes, there are guns, but they aren't being actively manufactured, and whatever bullets there are either found or made, and so there's a real paucity of firearms and ammunition for them. So it has happened that Joel and anyone who has managed to survive in this post-apocalyptic hellscape is pretty handy with just about any blunt or sharp object within arm's reach. And so I think I have played through both of these games in every way you can, but predominantly I'm most comfortable, as you are, playing a stealth-based character where I'm taking advantage of cover and, hurting people in horrible ways.
Yeah. And but they also introduce, again, the concept of like you were just saying, ammo is scarce. There are a lot of survival games out there. Like this game oddly reminded me of Gears of War, especially the first one.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great game. But unlike Gears of War, like this game, they're really pressing on you. Like, yeah, no, ammo is fucking hard to find. So like, you really got to be careful. There were more than one instance in both the first and second game where I sincerely was like, I do not know how I'm going to get out of this.
Yep.
And that is really cool because that is what a survivalist has to deal with. Do I use... so this game also has crafting. You can craft like bandages,
Molotov cocktails,
suppressors for your guns, stuff like that. And so it's like, yeah, is this cloth going to be used for a suppressor on my gun so I'm a little bit quieter, or is it going to be for a bandage so when I get beat the fuck up I can get some of my health points back? And this game does, again, both the first and the second do a great job at really, really pressing that on you. There are some other quote-unquote survival games that don't have that level that these two did. So as a gameplay, that was super fun to kind of learn. And again, it's like, do you take that shot? And it's also then, too, like, when you've got your sniper rifle and you miss, it's just like, God fucking damn it. It's just like, God damn it.
It's a big deal. I mean, there are very few games where you will want to just reload from your last save point when you miss a shot.
Exactly.
But there are moments in Last of Us 2, if you're a cautious player by nature, where you'll waste around and just be like, nope, I can't. I'm going back. I'm going to replay a whole 50-minute section because I need all of the shotgun shells because there aren't that many.
Yep. And so you go in this world, and another thing that they did obviously very well is this world is painted with detail where you are going around cities that are now just covered in plants and vines and trees. It's like nature has taken all
Nature
of
is
this
totally
back.
reclaiming the world. Yeah.
And that to me was amazing. And then
Yeah.
there's elements of dealing with humans, and then there's obviously the elements of dealing with zombies, and both have to be treated very differently, which I did like, because they both have pros and cons of how you can deal with them. I was better at sneaking around zombies than I was humans, but I was better at fighting humans, so it kind of
Yeah.
worked out.
Infected are much, much more difficult to deal with in terms of straight on combat and tend to be more durable because they're sort of brainless killing machines. But human beings, the AI was in the game is programmed to work as a group against you. It's sort of like being hunted by armed jackals, which definitely got worse in the second part. They really improved the AI in the second part. But even in the first part, there are a few moments where when you're going up against 5 or 6 humans, you would rather be facing down some of the worst infected possible in large numbers because it's literally just less frightening and less aggressive. And I think that really underlines like the core theme of the game, which is, there are a lot of core themes to the game, but if you had to break the franchise down, it's that clearly man is by far the worst monster.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is the thing that The Walking Dead did very effectively.
The one thing that I love is they do it way better in the second game. But it's like, okay, on the surface, humans are fighting. They're in their own tribes and they're fighting and they're killing each other.
Limited resources,
Limited resources, and then underground, underneath all of this, what is already horrible, underneath that horribleness is something growing that's even more terrifying. And I love that concept in any form of storytelling where it's like, if humanity could get over its own shit and realize what is the true horrors that are technically below us, beneath us, right underneath our noses, imagine what we could do. Imagine how we could then take care of that situation instead of focusing on the humanity of it. But at the same time, too, that's what the game is saying, though, is like, well, we are humans. If you kill my best friend, I'm, in a tribalism society, I'm going to come out and get revenge on you, which obviously we're going to
take out your whole family. Yeah. So, well, and I think there are again shows like The Walking Dead that have posited the theme that man's inhumanity, man is the worst thing ever, and that's what the show's really secretly about, and that feels so ham-fisted having played The Last of Us because that's just another environmental detail, as are the infected, as are nature reclaiming society and inconveniencing your every attempt to traverse the United States on your mission. It's all just window dressing for the theme of loss, for the theme of trust, and how that really spins out both individual stories and the larger scale story of will civilization totally collapse or will it be able to reconvene and sort of become anew. And the theme of loss is the thing that propels Joel to the place where we find him 20 years later, but the theme of trust and being willing to open his sort of fundamentally open his humanity back up is what the first part of the story is about. And Neil Druckmann, who's sort of responsible for the brain trust behind this game, he's the sort of I believe the main writer of the first game and a collaborative writer of the second one.
Okay.
Really summed it up beautifully, which is if you want to put it on its narrowest scope, the first game is about love and the second game is about hate.
Yep. Yeah.
And I don't think I can, that's a ringing endorsement because what ends up being the case is that Joel, after his friend and Tess and him are able to track down Robert, it turns out that Robert is somehow mixed up with a resistance group called the Fireflies. And in this post-apocalyptic world, there's a conceit that there is a resistance group long after the government has just decided they're going to stick with martial law for 2 decades and just protect the status quo as terrible as it is. There is a group of scientists and concerned citizens who have loosely banded together who are actively looking for a cure, which is a to-do item the government has totally abandoned at this point.
That it's just like when you're on your last thread, especially like, our nation, we do have a large military, and so it's like, well, now it's time to put it to use. That's what I always kind of got the feeling was like that was the main focus for right and justifiable reasons.
You can kind of tell that even under martial law, the soldiers you do encounter have in these 20 years become unbearably cruel and feudalistic.
Yeah.
And so there is a understanding that maybe the military has, not really been looking for a solution to the overarching problem, which is that sometimes when you breathe in the wrong place, you become a monster. And so with the science abandoned, with society's collapse, there's this last group of resistance fighters called the Fireflies who are both actively opposing the government because they're trying to cut out enough space and resources to actually find that cure. Well, the conceit of the first game then is that Ellie, this 12 to 13-year-old girl, you ultimately end up being tasked by an associate who's also the leader of the local Fireflies group and may actually be one of the elder Fireflies nationwide, with transporting a young girl safely to, I believe it's Salt Lake City.
You're recruiting kind of young, aren't you?
She's not one of mine.
Oh, shit. What happened?
Don't worry, this is fixable. I got his help. But I can't come with you.
Well, then I'm staying.
Ellie, we won't get another shot at this.
Hey, we're smuggling her?
There's a crew of Fireflies that'll meet you at the Capitol building.
That's not exactly close.
You're capable. You hand her off, come back, the weapons are yours. Double what Robert sold me.
Speaking of which, where are they?
Back in our camp.
We're not smuggling shit until I see them.
You'll follow me. You can verify the weapons. I can get patched up. But she's not crossing to that part of town. I want Joel to watch over her.
Whoa, I don't think that's
Bullshit,
the
I'm not
best
going
Ellie.
with him. How do you know them?
I was close with his brother Tommy. Said if I was ever in a jam, I could rely on him.
Was that before or after he left your little militia group?
He left you too. He was a good man.
I could just take her to the North Tunnel and wait for me there.
Jesus Christ.
Just cargo, Joel.
No more talking. You'll be fine. Now go with him.
Don't take long. And you, stay close. Let's go.
And so very, very shortly after meeting this girl who, curiously, is the same age as the daughter you lost 20 years ago, that's I think, one of the only ham-fisted things out there, but it serves the purpose. She is the only immune person who has ever been known. She was bitten not a handful of weeks before you meet her, and she has failed to change into a gibbering monster seeking to introduce a viral fungal load into your body.
Marlene set us up? Why the hell are we smuggling an infected girl?
I'm not infected.
No? Was just lying?
I can explain.
You better explain fast.
Look at this.
I don't care how you got infected.
It's 3 weeks old.
No, everyone turns within 2 days, so you stop bullshitting.
It's 3 weeks. I swear. Why would she set you up?
I ain't buying it.
Yeah, yes. And it's you get tasked with basically your mission is just get her to the Fireflies. Get her to this group, and they can take it from there. And that's the whole game, I mean, in a nutshell. And at first, when I was playing it, so Ellie tags along and she's, quite literally right next to you the entire game. And at first I was like, oh no, this is going to be escort mission the game.
Yeah, I have to drag this child with me for 20 hours. Great.
I was like, oh no, because for people that don't play video games, there's always it's a very old joke of like the escort mission, where you have to take a non-playable character, as we call it, an NPC, a computer character from like point A to point B, but of course they don't act like you do. So you have to deal with this computer,
and you have to protect them.
Like a great
ravaged.
The worst example in the world is in Golden Eye, where you have to protect what's her name, Natasha or Natalia. you have to protect her in this room while like soldiers. We have to get her to the room, and then these soldiers are just like gunning you and her down. And if she dies, you have to start the level all over again. And it just like, oh my gosh, especially on higher difficulties, it was like, oh no. But luckily, this game handles her very well. The thing that I loved is that like, if the bad guys spot her, but you're hidden, they don't see her. You know, like I was like, oh, thank God. You know, so like they do kind of. Ease the leverage of the escort mission on you, the character,
Definitely.
so that you can still play the game that you want and how you want to play it. And I was like, oh, thank God, because I was like, at first I was like, Chris, like, what are you doing to me, man? This is gonna kill me. So,
Well, there's another very important fact, which is given half a chance, she will kill everybody on the map.
yeah.
She is more than a capable fighter. And again, 12, 13-year-old girl, sure, she is wiry, and has managed to survive the apocalypse for 13 years, but she just has, initially through the game, a switchblade that was given to her by her mother. And she puts it to great effect. I mean, if you are taking down enemies, she is definitely there helping you and certainly not getting in your way. Now, she can be grabbed and hurt, and that certainly can interrupt gameplay and give you a game over screen, but you have to really put her in a better position for that to happen. She is fully capable.
Yeah,
And
I would say 99%.
that was a first.
Yeah, 99% of my game overs were because it was my fault. So I was like, okay, thank you. And but then yeah, I mean, it's basically listen, you and this 12, 13-year-old girl just bumming across America, and little by little you get like the character Joel begins to understand her. She begins to understand him through trust, through basically saying, this is what I'm capable of versus what Joel thinks she's capable of. And really good writing that just little by little, piece by piece, stitches them together. And obviously, as time goes along, he does, yes, kind of like adopt her as, as a daughter of his own.
He becomes sort of protective initially out of necessity.
Yeah.
Because there is something in it for him. And then he begins to become protective because he cares and because he thinks it's worth protecting. And that dawning, it delivered by two incredible actors, by the way, who just are probably the best two voice actors in the business. And through very short spates of dialogue and then sort of consistently as you're playing through the world at large, are able to show you a warming of the relationship, moments of tension followed by giving a little and giving a little more and breaking down those protected boundaries and making room for getting used to each other and then developing affection for each other. And this takes place over hours and hours and hours.
I would say I think the first game took me about 40 hours to play. I heard a lot of people say that they got it done in about 20 hours, but again, I like to take my time. If there's a hotel and there's 10 rooms that I can search for supplies, I am stopping in all 10 rooms.
Search all twice.
Yep, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with games taking longer than they're supposed to. That's never bothered me. But either way, I think the point that we're trying to make is that it is a journey. These are both pretty long games, and you're gonna feel the weight of that journey as you go on it. And then like there's some things like along the way, I guess in terms of development of Ellie, the one thing that and the development of like this father-daughter relationship that bonds over the game is that it is also kind of like there's a lot of symbols and there's a lot of things that happen throughout the game that actually kind of suggest the idea of life, like life as you and I would know it. Like for example, towards the end of the game, you're at a college. So you're taking Ellie to college. That's what a father does. That's what you do with your children.
Yep.
You take her to a hospital where a very harsh decision has to be made that could affect her life. These are the things that parents do. And there's like a lot of that sprinkled throughout the game where it's the story of life, but it forces you to think about then their situation, because it's like, okay, imagine sending your kid off to college. That can be sad and stressful, exciting, but it's also a major moment in a lot of people's life. But now you're going to college because you need to find guns and ammo to fight off of a zombie, and that makes then this story even a little bit more sad. Obviously, it's not sending her to college, it's metaphorical, but it makes you think then about your own life.
Well, and the whole time having these discussions with this little human who never lived in the normal world, who only has lived in this blasted post-apocalyptic wasteland. And, as it opens into you on your horse in this overgrown, destroyed college talking about how the rules of football work. And even Joel's not really able to parse what that is. And so just conversations, Ellie is obsessed with comic books and trading cards and music. She loves music and is so curious about, there's a moment where Joel and Ellie, I think this really puts their relationship into perspective, sort of midway through the game. There's a moment where Ellie stops, if you give her enough time, beside a fashion advertisement. The skinny, voluptuous-lipped model is, standing in a poster being a model, and she says basically something effective, "Why is she so skinny? I thought you guys had food back then." And Joel's response is, basically like, "Oh, well, some people were just really obsessed with the way they look." And Ellie's response, as a girl who has none of the sexism heaped on her growing up in this world, is just, her response is, "That's stupid."
That is stupid. Yeah, it's funny.
That's stupid. And he begins to really love her because she is so refreshingly unarmored.
Yeah.
And vulnerable in some really critical ways. She is not trusting. She grew up an orphan. Her mom died at childbirth. Her mom's best friend was Tess, who was the leader of the Fireflies, which is how she is known to her. Her only connection is this switchblade. She's been bounced around from military orphanage to military orphanage and often picked on and bullied, and has very few friends in this world. And as Joel begins to open up and answer questions, and he's kind of willing to talk to her a little bit about the world as it was before, and that relationship is developing. And it does make way later on for them to go to this college, to this hospital, to have a joyride, to meet some of quote unquote Dad's friends, some of the survivalists he's traded with, and begin to have this expression of a father-daughter relationship that is so unlike anything that has ever been done before, because while the setting is sort of well-trodden territory in modern times, and a lot of these tropes have been played out before, the particular assemblage of them, coupled with the willingness to let silence do the talking, to let time do its work, to let you think about the last thing Ellie just said and how momentous that might be for her as she's opening up for the first time to this father figure.
Yeah.
That is where it happens. It's in the quiet moments.
Yep, and this game excels at that. I can think of there's a game. It's actually been around for a long time. It's Doom, and there's like some modern remakes of the game, and they are fun to play, but holy shit, are they absurd? And I say that as a good thing.
I hate them.
I like the 2016 one. The new one, I'm not so. I don't really like.
That's the one that I got off that train. But the original.
Oh, it's a great game. Yeah. But these games, if you've never played Doom is you have like 10 weapons in your hand at all times, and you are just running around. If it moves, you shoot it until it stops moving. It's loud. It's bloody. It's disgusting. But it's supposed to be. They're great games. I love them. But there's no moment of pause. Every single time you are playing Doom, it is 100% of the time. And there are moments in The Last of Us where, you're just walking around with Ellie talking. That's it. And it's like another great example. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's closer to the end of the game. You realize that there's a zoo nearby.
Oh, yeah.
And you're walking around, and all of a sudden you see
Ellie takes off.
Yeah, Ellie's like, what?
She sees something and goes running off through this Cineplex.
Yeah, she can't figure it out.
And you're freaking out because, you're her erstwhile father, I suppose. And
you think it's a monster. You think it's this, you're like, okay, here comes a boss fight. Here comes a big fight.
She's not being careful. She's being the opposite of everything you've taught her to be in order to get to this point at the end of the journey.
Yep, she's running
caution to wind.
Running around, being loud. And you get outside, and you're kind of elevated. I think you're on top of a building. And there's a herd of giraffes. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's not, okay, yeah. And it's beautiful. And, I got goosebumps when I saw it.
And what's wild is it's doing so many things at once. The giraffes are clearly the giraffe that approaches you because it doesn't know to be afraid.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because there are no people around. This world, the Salt Lake City that you're in, they have obviously escaped from the Salt Lake City Zoo, and there's actually a note you can find that talks about releasing all the animals from the zoo as the apocalypse was happening. And they've just been reproducing, and the infected don't care about them one way or the other, so they're free to peacefully eat the leaves and drink the water. And one of them approaches Ellie, and you're able to guide your sort of adoptive daughter to lay her hands to her first giraffe. And it is just a heart-stoppingly beautiful moment because it is rendered gorgeously, but it has so many layers of meaning. You are taking your daughter to the zoo, and the world is fine without us. And it's very much saying that as well.
Yeah, and it's just like, and again, it's just these moments of quiet where it's just you and Ellie, and it's still fun. It's not boring. It's not. It's very much engaging. It's obviously world building done very well because that is the real world. Like I still think they should make like a Darth Vader movie where it's just like a Tuesday,
Like
like what does he do at the when he's at his base? Does he go up to his troops and is like, "Hey, you want to go get a beer?" Yeah.
I want to spend 5 minutes with that dude.
Yeah, I have to sit down in a 30-minute meeting with my fellow commanding, officers and generals to talk war strategy. What's that like? And like
joke this time.
Yeah.
That choice.
So this game does that insanely well, where it's just like this is life, and this is how two people become friends. And
explaining it to somebody who's never played it, it's very easy to make it sound like there's a lot of quiet moments where nothing's happening and it's absolutely fucking boring. What Naughty Dog's sort of excellent at is giving your brain a constant dynamic range of quiet moments that are technically unbelievable looking and sounding, and sound very particularly the sound design for this game. Dripping water, atmospheric sounds. You are constantly in a space that sounds exactly as big and as terrifying or amazing as it should be. So you're either given contextual clues about what the world was like when it ended, beautiful scenes of destroyed urban or rural landscapes, being able to see a path. It doesn't feel like you're in a tight, choked, forward motion only linear game. You can waltz through a downtown area, look at how people boarded up their houses, what plates of food they left where. You can really see that moment that the world ended. And then there may be a moment where you are attacked or you have to sneak up on someone. You're trying to get from point A to point B. There's so much to do, so much to read, so much to interact with, that there's never literally a dull moment. You're always at full, delectable mental engagement, even if nothing's happening.
Yeah. And it's storytelling at its finest, because all good storytelling, you need to give your audience a break. There are some movies, modern cinema, I have a weird relationship with it, because obviously I still like upcoming movies, but the general scope of storytelling has changed in the last, I want to say, like 5 years. And I don't know if it's for the better. That's a whole conversation. But what I'm trying to get at is that in this game, yes, they have these moments of lull, but then when the action picks up, then you're feeling it. You're awake, you're attentive, and you're going to remember it. It's going to stand out, and it's going to be important. When you're running around in Doom for 4 hours straight, just hitting everything with a shotgun.
It's just like eating nothing but pixie sticks for an afternoon.
Exactly.
The moment, great, but afterwards, you're not really sure what happened. Your tongue is covered in velvet.
Exactly.
And I'd actually compare what's going on there to the action of reading your favorite book, because with your favorite book, you can read a profound momentary sentence and stop, close the process it, make a cup of tea, come back, open the book back up, and dive right in. And the pacing of this game gives you an enormous leeway for stillness, for just taking a beat to digest what's happening. And to me, in terms of modern filmmaking, No Country for Old Men was actually a big inspiration for this game.
Okay, yeah.
Joel Miller is a direct descendant of the main character of No Country for Old Men. the Texas location, the overall feel, his sense of physicality and footedness in terms of violence, in terms of who he was as a man. There was not a lot of second thoughts going on in that main character. And similarly with Joel, for 20 years, he's been doing what needed to be done and mourning, not processing this enormous trauma and grief. And he really never does. It's so cold and old that it's just scar tissue at this point, but he's become a functional surviving machine. And you're watching that scar melt away and enable him to have feelings, to laugh, to tell stories. At one point, he confesses to Ellie on their journey that he wanted to be a singer, that he used to play guitar. One day, maybe he'd teach her at some point. And so he's beginning to open up to her, but she's also beginning to open up to him. She is clearly allowing herself to be daughtered, if that can be the term. She is allowing him to protect and advise and teach her. She's really listening. And that begins when he and her, they find themselves in a situation where they are outgunned and outnumbered, and he trusts her for the first time to take a rifle and to watch his back as he dispatches all of these enemies.
And she's right there with you, and she's doing it.
That is the moment where they go from being somewhat disagreeable strangers who are kind of forced into a situation where they have chemistry, but they aren't planning on this being a permanent thing, to real relationship. And it takes that first spark of trust. And it's not trust in giving her a gun. That's part of it. But the biggest is trust that she can do this, and that she is strong, that she is capable, and that they really only have each other to rely on. And there's that whole sort of forged in fire thing happening. But on that they build, their little version of civilization, the two of them as a unit. And that's launched from there through the rest of the game.
All right, now, I'm going to jump down there and I'm going to clear us a path.
What about me?
You stay here.
This is so stupid. We'd have more of a fucking chance if you let me help.
I am. You seem to know your way around a gun. You reckon you can handle that?
Well, I sort of shot a rifle before, but it was at rats.
Rats?
With BBs.
Well, it's the same basic concept. Lift it up. All right, now. You're going to lean right into that stock, because it is going to kick a hell of a lot more than any baby rifle.
Okay.
Go and pull the bolt back. Grab it right there. Just tug it. There you go. And as soon as you fire, you're going to want to get another round in there quick. Listen to me. If I get into trouble down there, you make every shot count. Yeah?
I got this.
All right.
Hey gang, Calvin here, talking to you directly. This is the first time I have ever done this, so bear with me because I'm currently sitting in a room by myself, talking to myself, which is a predicament I don't often find myself in. But some quick news and updates. First, you may have noticed that the format of the show of today's episode was a little bit different. Long story short, Chris and I spoke on The Last of Us Part 1 and 2 for exactly 6 hours and 8 minutes. Chris can talk for as much as he is handsome, and believe me when I say he's a very handsome man. So as tempted as I am to release a 6 hour and 8 minute long podcast episode, I don't think that's fair to the audience. So I'm currently working on that, still working on the edit. So this whole conversation, instead of being one episode, is going to be broken up into 4, maybe 5. I'm still working on the edit at this point, so it is uncertain at this moment, but I just wanted to let you know. Another quick little bit of news. I would like to share 2 podcasts if you are into podcasts and podcasting. The first is 2 of my really good personal friends had put out a podcast a while ago, the first 5 episodes, called Night Faces. It's a very good story. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's definitely a production based around a strip club in Wisconsin. Very, 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 very music and story-driven podcast. So if that is your jam, I would highly recommend it. Again, it's called Night Faces, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts. Another podcast I want to give just a quick shout out to is a podcast called Dancing is Forbidden, a podcast by a gentleman named Ronnie Neely. Ronnie and I connected through Instagram, through our shared love and interest of Aqua Teen Hunger Force, and his podcast is dedicated 100% to all things Aqua Teen Hunger Force. He does a great job talking about trivia, some facts you may not know, facts that I certainly didn't know thus far listening to his podcast. It's great. He goes back in time and shares, what else was popular in the time of when this episode came out. So it's a great trip down memory lane back to, say, like around the early 2000s. And he goes through every single episode and talks about it in detail, again, sharing trivia and fun facts. If you're into Aqua Teen Hunger Force, the TV show and or movie, I highly recommend checking out his podcast. Again, it's called Dancing is Forbidden, and it's available on Apple Podcasts. And finally, I did want to just bring up really quick that in terms of the You show, we were able to put it on a couple different platforms now. So if it's easier for people, it's also now available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube as well. I've also gone through and created a Facebook and an Instagram account. Both are the You Show. We'd love to have you join. I think it would be really fun to build a community where, I can post questions about upcoming interviews and say, hey, if there's any discussions and or topics or questions that you would like to see in the show, feel free to drop us a line and let us know. That would be greatly appreciated. I think building a community out of shared, loved things is a great community to be a part of, and I would be honored to be able to share something like that with everybody that's currently listening in. And last and not least, I do really want to just take a moment and to say thank you to everybody who has supported this. It's been a journey, an interesting journey thus far. I'm excited to see where the show continues to head, but I really do want to say thank you to you, the listener. Thanks for taking the time to listen to me ramble on with my friends about the things that we love. I appreciate it. I think my guests appreciate it. And really, seriously, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you for being here. This has been a dream project of mine for quite some time now, and it's been a total blast putting it together and getting people involved, and creating something out of nothing is always just a really great journey and experience. So sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting the show. We will be back next week to then finish our discussion on The Last of Us Part 1. Quick side note too, I know that the naming conventions on these episodes are probably going to be confusing because it's called The Last of Us Part 2 in the episode, but we're still talking about Part 1, which is technically the name of the game. But anyway, I'll just start off with each episode basically saying, hey, this is Part 2. If you haven't listened to Part 1, please go back and check that out at that point. But anyway, we'll be back next week where Chris and I will continue our conversation on The Last of Us. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.